Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning to you. And thank you for joining us today. I hope each of you are keeping safe and well. My name is Phoebe, Trade Manager at the British Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, or BMCC as we are more commonly known. I'm pleased to welcome you to the BMCC's webinar series on the impact of COVID-19. Today's topic will be mental health, adapting to challenging times. The focus will be on family and business environments. Today, we are delighted to collaborate with the Malaysian Mental Health Association, MMHA, and Riverside Consulting, CIC UK. The MMHA is an NGO promoting mental health in Malaysia, and Riverside Consulting UK is a collective of highly skilled and experienced individuals with a focus on mental health for children, adolescents, and families. Joining us today are subject matter experts, Ms. Cheong Jen, Executive Director of MMHA, who will moderate this session. Hey, Jen. Mr. Tony House and Ms. Marie Ashwood, International ADHD trainers from Riverside Consulting UK. Hello, Marie and Tony.
Hello.
And last but not least, Dr. Eugene, Psychiatrist and Medical Lecturer from Universiti Putra, Malaysia, UPM. Hello, Dr. Eugene.
Hello.
Once again, thank you to all our speakers. Before we start the session, a little bit of housekeeping. Please be forthcoming with your questions during the session and send it in through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and not in the public chat function. We will attempt to address your questions if time permits. So without further ado, I would like to invite Jen to begin the session. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Phoebe. The COVID-19 experience may leave some people feeling very vulnerable and scared long-term, even when the danger is somewhat under control in Malaysia. Whereas previously, they may have had some positive outlook and a sense of security, they may now find themselves worrying about personal safety, family safety, work, and/or financial future. Without further delay, we will bring our discussion to the first question, which is, who are the most vulnerable among us in terms of experiencing acute mental health issues? How may this manifest, and how can they find a new stability to deal with it? Over to you, Dr. Eugene.
All right, thank you, Jen. All right, COVID-19, this pandemic itself is actually unprecedented. It's a new thing, and the management and handling of it, it's also unprecedented. Most of us are not actually have a very clear guidelines and preparation for it. So most of us are actually learning as we go. As a result of that, I feel that everyone is going to experience some form of stress or in one form or another during this period due to the changes that COVID-19 brought about. And how an individual actually reacts to this stress would vary from person to person. Common symptoms that we can talk about, things like appetite changes, sleeping problems, thinking, excessive worry, feeling overwhelmed, is actually part and parcel of how our mind is telling us we are going through stress. And sometimes we are so used to it, actually, if you're having stress, we need to find a problem to solve it. And that's where all these thoughts. So that's the first thing I want to highlight, in the sense that all of us will be experiencing stress, and our reaction would be different individual to individual. But some of us might be more vulnerable to this stress. People who have past trauma or underlying mental illness, they might find that some of their symptoms might exacerbate during this period. And in terms of finding stability, I think if we go back to the first step, the ones that have all of us experiencing stress, all of us will have some methods of coping with it. If we don't, I think I would suggest actually looking out for new methods of finding how to cope with stress. And for those who have underlying mental illness, who have experienced more severe symptoms, they might actually need to talk back to their healthcare professionals to see is there anything that can be done on top of whatever treatment they are receiving.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Eugene, for your input. Over to you, Tony.
I suppose I was thinking about this particularly from the area of children and families, and particularly the vulnerable children that myself and Maria have worked with for many years. I think for children with issues like learning problems, learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, those types of problems where there's a pre-existing difficulty, and then you introduce the stress that Dr. Eugene has just spoken about, which will be affecting all of the family, their school friends, everyone else. And there's a very big sense of the unknown with this. Everyone is learning. It's quite clear, even the experts advising governments are still learning. So for those children and their families and carers, this is an added dimension. And for many children with those types of problems, when you impose additional external stress, then their symptoms will often get worse. So with ADHD children, you'll get more agitation and activity. They may well be more argumentative. For children with autism, the change from the normal routines of school and home life can be a really big challenge. As many of the parents will know, even minor changes, just having your meal at a slightly different time, not having the same routine of getting up and going out of the door Monday to Friday, that type of thing. I don't know if you want to add anything, Marie.
I guess I'm thinking also about older teenagers and young adults who reportedly, both in China and in the UK, are finding the situation more difficult perhaps than older adults. I don't know if that applies to Malaysia as well. I can imagine it might, given that it seems to be not just the UK that's reporting that. I guess because young adults, teenagers, the social part of their lives is so important. And although they can keep in touch with friends through Snapchat and all the gaming and all those kinds of things, it does interrupt what would naturally be a developmental stage of being with their peers, making new relationships and so on. So I think for them it's probably particularly hard as well.
Thank you. I think the one constant that we share locally in Malaysia and in the UK and many parts of the world is the learning. We are constantly learning, and this is something so new, and it can be challenging. But if we were to just reframe our mindsets, even as an individual, we should take it like a learning opportunity. Okay. The next point of discussion would be, when we do get back to work, many of our colleagues may be bringing mental health issues and concerns with them. How can we identify, manage, and support as their manager or co-worker? And is there any guidance or guideline that companies can adopt for employees? And which mental health bodies can we turn to, and how effective are they? Over to you, Dr. Eugene.
I suppose because we are, as we mentioned again, stress, changes and all these things, companies will actually need to adapt to this current situation, in the sense that they need to relook in their company's direction. What are the changes that the company itself would actually has to make in terms of adapting to the new, what we commonly known as the new normal. And from that, we also put in place of things that can address mental health. One common thing that people usually address to use is actually employee assistance programs. Companies can look into this, and there are people providing this in Malaysia. So I think that's one way of actually addressing mental health. Other than that, I think HRs or managerial positions should also look into doing mental health promotions, educating their staff what is mental health, what are the signs of stress, such as the signs that we mentioned earlier, changes in sleep and all these things, and also encourage their employees to actually find ways of adapting and refinding a balance between work and social life and all this. But in terms of looking out individually, I think we can all learn about signs of stress. If you find one of your colleagues become more withdrawn, not as focused as before, more quiet, suddenly there's a marked change of behavior, approach them. Then just be kind enough, ask how are you coping with all of this, and see do they actually need help or any form of support. The other thing that you can do is actually, if you find that they do need support or they do need additional help, maybe refer them to the necessary agencies. We do have agencies outside, numerous NGOs that provide, MMHA itself is one, Befrienders is one that's commonly mentioned, and I think there are many more other agencies around that can provide supportive one. Even if necessary, they can even seek professional help. And the other thing, one word of caution about the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program that I mentioned just now, because different companies are going to have different directions, don't just stick with one company that offers EAP. Look around and see which one will suit your company, but do check their credentials to see whether they are actually providing what they say, because I have heard news, I have learned about unscrupulous company supposedly providing EAP but end up giving other non-scientific evidence-based programs that can be harmful to the company.
Thank you, Dr. Eugene. I think in terms of the EAP program, yes, you are right in terms of finding out the credentials, and MMHA has had its own share of people questioning on how certain companies or organizations are offering programs which doesn't sound quite right. As MMHA, we have also been supporting the workplace through these 6 weeks of the MCO. I think in these 6 weeks of the MCO, we have worked with more workplaces than we have in the past year. Right. Okay, Marie, would you like to take this discussion further?
Yes, one of the things I'm thinking about is the pressure that employers and business owners are going to be under. And it's, I suppose, similar to the pressure that parents are going to feel under as well. And in the same way as parents perhaps need to model calm and confidence through this as much as possible to their children, there's also something about employers and business owners not allowing their own anxieties to overwhelm their employees. There's been some talk about people feeling that they have to make up for lost time when this is over. And that's obviously going to put an awful lot of pressure on everybody in the workplace.
Thank you, Marie. Anything to add, Tony?
I suppose following on from that, I was thinking of some of the things that I've been reading about happening here, and just thinking about some of my past experience in relation to more sort of acute short-term disaster situations, and just things like if people are in key jobs and they take some time off, they often feel quite anxious returning. They also feel guilty about not having been there at a time of great difficulty, feel like they're letting their colleagues down, and then feel anxious when they come back. If they're faced with overwhelming work, as we all would, you naturally can sometimes try to avoid the most difficult parts of your job. Not an unnatural thing to do, but it's important for managers and employers to be aware of those things and approach them positively.
You're right about that, Tony, about how the way we should take things and how we look at things. A comment that came in from one of the participants is we have to acknowledge that the fear of contracting the COVID-19 virus when employees do return to work is very, very real. You know, the threat on how we are suspecting that certain people might have gone to certain places, and whether or not I'm safe at the workplace is a real point to consider. Before we move further, there has been a question that came in from one of the participants, which asked, since there is a stigma against mental health problems, how can employers address a possible increase in mental health problems among employees because they may not come forward because of the stigma? Dr. Eugene, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think stigma, and here in this sense, is not just related to mental health. It wouldn't, in fact, it relates to the question, the statement that we mentioned about the fear of contracting. All of this do drive on stigma, fear of being infected, fear of actually having the infection, and on top of that, fear of actually having mental illness. All of this would form stigma. I think employers, you know, the manager, the HR actually will need to have a clear guideline and policies in terms of being an open policy, saying that we our company's stance is that we wouldn't have discrimination. If you do come forward, we will protect your confidentiality. That means if you as an employee tells your higher a position, we will protect their confidentiality and we will actually assist you to seek help. That's one way to reassure the employees that they can get help. The other thing, that if they don't want to approach, don't want to open up, what companies can do is that set up pathways that they can seek help anonymously, provide them where are the helplines, provide them associations, provide them how to seek help from the hospitals or psychiatric clinics or psychological clinics, provide them pathways of actually doing that. And if the worst comes to worst, I mean, I don't think everyone would do this, but actually setting up a hotline that the employers can call in. I mean, employees can call in. This is part and parcel of what EAP programs sometimes will offer, in the sense that they will have a hotline that they can call in and talk, either receiving simple counselings or even ask how to seek help. So that's another option. And in terms of other stigma, I think that stigma infection and stigma of actually mental health, the company needs to have clear education saying that, look, we understand the fears, we understand that there is this fear that is existing about mental health, about mental problems, about COVID infection, and this is what we are doing. List them down step by step and show it to the employees that we are doing something, and I suppose that will give some form of reassurance for them, not just to seek help, but it also calms down some of the fear and minimizes employees of actually wanting to go into work.
I think the essence here is keeping the communication open and empathetic. Often the empathetic it loses focus, or it loses its luster when we are communicating with others, especially when we ourselves are under threat. On that note, MMHA at the Malaysian Mental Health Association, we are offering free emotional support to anybody who might need to talk to somebody, because the need is there, and we have been getting very, very overwhelming response with regards to emotional support. Yeah, so and it's the link is available on our Facebook page if anybody would need to have information on that. Marie, would you like to take this discussion also on the stigma in terms of help seeking?
Yes, I think what Dr. Koh said right at the beginning of this session, that we're all experiencing stress. There's none of us that are bulletproof. None of us, for none of us, is this a walk in the park. I think it's important to keep that message in the forefront so that people don't feel that their reactions are in some way their fault. That actually we've all got reactions to it, and that's perfectly natural. We're in an extraordinary situation. It's important to remember that.
Thank you, Marie. Tony, any comments from you?
Yes, I mean, I would agree with what's been said. I think it's important as far as possible to keep it as an open and normal conversation, that your mental health issues happen, particularly at times of stress. Those of us who have been managers know that we're not immune from it. Being a manager has plenty of stress in its own right, even without exceptional times. And if you're able to talk to employees about that being a normal reaction to circumstances, help normalize it and make it clear to people that they're not going to be seen as weak or failing. It won't jeopardize their employment if they acknowledge having difficulties, because these are the sort of things that people worry about. For example, some people would think, if I admit to being stressed about this, I'll never get promoted, so I can't tell anybody. And I think the statistics, as with almost everything to do with mental health and communication, indicate that men are much less likely to admit any difficulties than women are. So you have to watch them. And the other thing about that is with men, at times of extreme stress, they're much more likely to kill themselves, as well as not communicating. So it's important to try and keep those doors open. There is a very good report from a couple of years ago on mental health in the workplace and how to address it. as a longer term issue, not in acute crisis situations. It's by a company called Deloitte. I can supply a link for people to find that after the webinar if they want to see it.
Thank you, Tony. On that note, a question on that note of communication and empathy and being open. Malaysians, there's a comment saying that Malaysians are usually quite shy in speaking out on mental wellness or illness. What are the best practices when we need to approach that person? Dr. Eugene?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Malaysians are quite shy to...
In speaking out on mental wellness or mental illness for that matter, what are the best practices to approach?
Okay. For my experience, actually, that's actually a myth in the sense that it's a common belief. But once you get people talking about it, they won't stop there. We actually talk a lot. I suppose it's just about setting up a platform, setting up means of actually getting people to talk. We do see this, people saying that, they're shy, they don't want to talk about mental illness, but yet we see this in media, people promoting this. Yet we still see this on Facebook. If you look at, I'm not sure about others, but even on my Facebook, right, there's a lot of people sharing things that, how to think positive, how to be good, things like that that's related to psychological. So I don't think people's actually shy to want to share about mental wellness or mental distress or any of those. It's just more of, is there a platform that they can share? It's just like, as Jen mentioned just now about the supportive, as soon as you put up the ad itself, people are calling in, people are actually approaching and say, I might need help. So, but how to go about setting the platforms? I suppose that depends on who's doing it. Is it through NGOs? Is it within the company itself? Or is it, from a state level, national level, I guess?
Thank you, Dr. Eugene. Marie, would you like to add on to that?
Just to agree with what people are talking about, how difficult it is sometimes for people to step forward, but how important it is to make room for them to do that. Certainly I'm now working in private practice, and it really stands out that people often come initially with a lot of anxieties about having a problem. But once they're able to talk about it and to understand that actually their reaction to whatever it was, even before COVID, is a normal reaction, and that actually that they're not in any way, as I think Tony said, weak or failing. I think that's such a turning point for a lot of people very early on in therapy, to understand that it's okay, what they're experiencing is important, and it doesn't reflect badly on them.
Yes, you're right on the supportive environment. Tony, you have any comments?
Yeah, I suppose following on from that, I was thinking about my experience of my time as a manager in the National Health Service in the UK. And I often found one of the important things was to not always approach people formally. There's a bit of a tendency as a manager to think you have to arrange a meeting with someone, sit them down, by which you've already made them anxious and less likely to talk. So you need to take opportunities, just everyday opportunities, to just get alongside people. And whilst you're working with them, have a chat. It may not start about anything significant, but just talking generally about things and then picking up what's happening. You get a sense of how they're feeling, if there are any issues bothering them. If you can talk a bit about how you're feeling about the situation, they may well reflect on that and engage in a proper conversation with you as a human being rather than as their manager. And that's, I think that's always useful to remember.
Thank you, Tony. Before we answer the next question, I would just like to bring this point for discussion. And the question goes, my child has ADHD and is restless. And he or she is demanding all the time. We argue a lot and get upset. What can I do to make this better? Marie, would you like to comment on this?
I think it's a very difficult situation to be in, to have a young person with ADHD, particularly severe ADHD, in a very contained, a very well controlled situation. It doesn't allow for the things that help young people with ADHD. It doesn't allow for that very much, which is movement and new things and interest and what have you. You're stuck in a house with a child who really doesn't want to be there. Tony, do you want to take this on?
I suppose just thinking about this, about how to try and manage that, particularly if you're limited to a relatively small enclosed environment. Children with ADHD are famously annoying in small environments. It's like being on a long car journey with them. They never sit still and they never shut up. So and that's very wearing. It's okay for them because it's like anything. When you're making the noise, you don't suffer from it. But so it's how can you manage that if they're two parents or other people? Can you take it in turns to be with the person while someone else gets a break? I think identifying people's own small amount of space at times when you're in a sort of movement control order situation is very helpful. I was reading some things about that from the people that do research in the Antarctic and spend 100 days in a cabin with 6 other people, and they have to identify a corner that's theirs. And I think it's important for families to do that as well, and for young people with ADHD to have somewhere where they can have their stuff, and if they want to sit there on their phone or device or whatever, that's a good thing to do. Helping them to fidget appropriately in a way that doesn't annoy other people. There's often a tendency to try and stop children that fidget from doing it, but telling them directly to stop it generally makes them more agitated, probably makes them fidget more, and is more likely to start an argument. So finding them something soft and not too noisy that they can fidget with so that the noise doesn't annoy other people, and actually encouraging them to do that, because then you reduce the anxiety, and any additional anxiety makes ADHD symptoms worse. So it's important as a parent to look after yourself as well. Try and give yourself a break, give yourself time to relax, and do other things. Just thinking, yeah. I'll stop there, otherwise I'll keep going for ages and use all the time.
Thank you, Tony. I think many parents amongst us can resonate with that. I don't think we need to have children with a diagnosed ADHD and many will agree with the annoying noise and them not suffering from it. Right. Before there's a question which came in from Rofiza Razali. On special need kids, we have answered it somewhat, but I'll just read it out in case any one of us has anything to add. Okay, those who have special needs kids, they find it especially challenging now dealing with their kids, unable to send their kids for therapies and dealing with meltdowns. Any advice on this type of situation is damaging to both parents and children. Would you like to go at it, Marie?
I didn't actually catch all of the question, Jen. I'm sorry, and it's not come up. So could you?
Because in this situation that we are in now, parents are unable to send children for therapies, and they're dealing with constant meltdowns. Any advice on this type of situation, because it's damaging for parents and children both?
So it's children not having the usual support and input that they would have in normal times. Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's very, very difficult. I think Tony actually covered quite a bit of it in terms of trying to adapt the environment a bit to suit the child, and to make things easier, make things less stressful. Whatever makes things calmer and happier in that situation, I think is really important. And positive distraction rather than allowing a situation to get more and more difficult. You know, changing the focus, doing something, let's go and do something else, let's go and do this, let's go and do that, can be much more helpful than trying to negatively manage the situation, you know, and getting very upset yourself. I think modeling calm and contentment, even when you don't feel it inside, can help in a situation enormously, rather than actually letting your own anxieties take over. Because once your own anxieties are out there, the child is going to react to that and is going to feel a lot worse. So I don't know if you've got thoughts about that, Tony?
I suppose I was thinking we wouldn't have time in this format to go into details about a specific child. I think we are planning to make our email contacts available at the end of this. And if someone wanted to email something with a bit more detail for an email discussion afterwards, I'd be happy to look at that. Because I was thinking, those issues of learning disability and the child's understanding, and then how you help the child to understand what's happening. As I'd mentioned earlier, managing the changes of routine and establishing a new routine can be quite challenging, and that's also going to be for a limited amount of time in this situation. Managing things like regular bedtimes, making sure the child gets enough sleep. As Marie said, with young children and special needs children, if you can distract, redirect, and then praise them for their good behavior when they engage with the redirection, that can be helpful in steering their behavior. And identifying what causes the meltdowns. For some children, that can be things that we don't always immediately notice. For example, a lot of children with special needs have particular sensory sensitivities. So they might be greatly annoyed by some background noise that's going on. Maybe the washing machine or another child's toy or something like that. Maybe particular clothes that they're wearing feeling a bit too hot, or those sorts of things that you don't always think of as the first cause.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tony.
Jen, just to add on a bit.
Yes, Dr. Eugene.
I think what the question that the person asked is about, they were unable to go for therapy in physical, in persons. Those, because of the MRO, is actually being restricted. But what they could actually do is actually call up their therapist. They might have contingency plans or even emergency plans that they can help in terms of this kind of situations. Those that are very severe kind of difficult behaviors, could they help consult over the phone or something like that? As far as I know, most centers, even though the therapy that requires to be there physical is not ongoing, they do still provide support over the phone, or some even using the internet. But there is a different challenges because of individual illnesses in terms of neurodevelopment.
I think that's a good idea, going online or virtual for therapy. Something is better than nothing, right? Just to help ease the situation temporarily. Right.
I think that's a very good suggestion. I think that's very important, actually. It just reminded me, my son is a music therapist here in the UK, and he's actually found he's been quite successful working online with youngsters that he didn't think that would have been possible in the past, but it has been okay.
Thank you, Tony. I think there is a question. We are back at mental health at the workplace. Karen would like to ask this question. What is the best way to support bosses who are now managing more employees in the virtual world, particularly opening up conversations about well-being and mental health? What do you think, Eugene?
I think as we adapt to this, as we talk about companies going on, we seem to always focus about how to make the company work in terms of, okay, let's start more teleconferencing meeting, let's make plans for the company, etc. But people seem to forget that the company also consists of elements like social elements, and that's the things that will also push forward a company, its employees and employees. So in terms of manager-wise, how can you support, instead of just only focusing on productivity work, take time also to arrange some form of connections between you and your employees. Maybe do meetings over lunch, prepare their own lunch and they do the discussions over lunch, or even do individual conferencing, video conferencing, just to ask how are you, that's not really related to work. These are things that on a day-to-day basis, pre-COVID, we are already doing that face-to-face, and don't neglect that, don't forget about that, except only make adaptation, use the IT methods. The other thing is that I suppose manager can also be more encouraged. Previously, we talk about communications. Now, I think it's even more important that managers and HRs at the higher ends have to actually encourage the employees to find a way to have, their personal time, find how to draw out the boundaries, when do they expect to reply their emails and meetings, so that the balance can come out, some form of normality. And all of this shouldn't be forgotten. I suppose that will help. The managerial skills that we are commonly exposed to previously on how to handle teams and all these things, we really need to relook at it and adjust it to the current situation, and just don't forget some of the basic human elements of it.
I think the situation that we are in now is really, really unprecedented, right? Tony, do you have anything to add to this?
I suppose I was thinking of the risk of, in times like this, understandably and naturally, everyone gets caught up in the sense of crisis and urgency. And it's easy within that to lose the sense of priority. As Dr. Eugene was saying, the ability to prioritize and decide when enough's enough. All of us can only do a certain amount of work in a given time. I remember years ago, I had a bit of involvement in the Lockerbie bombing crisis when the plane landed on the town of Lockerbie. One of the things that happened in that was some people got so caught up in it, they actually didn't go home at the end of shifts and kept working. One man did 3 consecutive days non-stop, and no one stepped in and stopped him. And he did himself some significant psychological harm by doing that. So I think it's important for managers themselves to manage themselves. You can't be awake 24 hours a day and do everything. Neither can your employees. So you do need to prioritize. And in terms of productivity, I think it's important to remember that in the long term, supporting your employees, still having them at work and still functioning, in the long term is the biggest contribution to productivity, rather than the immediate crisis, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Tony. If there is nothing more to add, I would like to take the next question from the participant, Shi Wei. Could the panel suggest practical activities which can be introduced in the workplace to prevent mental health issues in the workplace? Dr. Eugene, do you want to start with this?
Practical activities. There's so many actually. I can't think of any. Okay. One of the ones that I commonly would use is something that I practice. WHO actually came out with a manual called "Doing What Matters in Time of Stress." It's a comic written manual that I think you can actually encourage your team members to actually read it. That would somehow work on an individual basis. The other things is that maybe start having activities that's related to mental health education. It's not about teaching them about mental illness. It's actually teaching them what is normal. Again, what is normal in terms of stress reaction, what is expected in this time, and how else you can go about with it. The other thing, encourage personal time. Teach employees that it's okay to take time off. It's okay to be overwhelmed. Find ways to actually readjust back, relook at the schedule to adapt to the current one. Don't go back to the previous ones, because that's probably not going to work anymore. Other than that, I'm a fan of mindfulness, but that one is not everyone's cup of tea. You can look up mindfulness activities that can be simply, download the app. There's many other ways you can look at it. And I think that can help also encourage activities that's involving mindfulness. Maybe Tony, do you have any additional? Because it's a wide range.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, I think things like mindfulness, fairly simple, practical, progressive relaxation techniques that you can learn as a simple exercise routine that help you relax, and people can use and practice, because mindfulness and relaxation are skills like any other. And if you practice them at times, when you don't necessarily need them, you're actually better at them when you do need them. So it's a skill to learn at any time and continue to use. And keeping, I think keeping communication open, making opportunities for people to meet together and mutually support each other. There's a big movement at the moment. I think it's come from America and it's being adopted in the UK in hospitals dealing with COVID. They're calling it Schwartz rounds. They're basically a non-judgmental open team meeting, type of thing we've been doing in mental health settings for a long time, I think, or should have been. And having those opportunities where there's a non-judgmental chance to say what you want to say. It's neither right nor wrong, and you get the support of your colleagues, that type of thing, and opportunities for activities together.
Marie, do you have anything to add? Sorry.
I'm just thinking also of something else that's happening in the hospital dealing with COVID, is to have a place that people can go if they just want 5 or 10 minutes of time to be out of the situation. So I can't remember, there's a word that they're using for it in the hospitals, but just somewhere to go if you just want to breathe and calm down and get yourself back together again before you go back out. So it's a combination of support from other people, but also having a chance to just be out of it for a few minutes without judgment, without anybody sort of thinking that that's a bad thing to do.
Could I just say one more quick thing?
Sure, Tony.
Yeah, it was just about modern communication and the use of smartphones and other devices. It means people can't escape. And I think that's something that's very important to think about. There needs to be a time of day when everyone agrees that's it. No more emails, no more communication. There's a recent study showed, I think, amongst young adults, I think nearly 90% of them use their devices when they're on the toilet, and about 40% were using them in the shower. And you get similar behavior amongst managers. It becomes competitive to be the one who doesn't, you must always answer. I remember a manager I worked with several years ago damaged her BlackBerry because she dropped it in the bath when she was answering emails at 10:30 at night. And that's psychologically not good for you. You send people an email saying, don't answer any more emails. Don't send them one asking for more responses.
I think you're very right there about setting limitations and boundaries. Am I right? And also allowing ourselves to take time off and spend time with ourselves. In the silence of the surroundings. That's very, very essential. On the note of workplace mental health, there's another question. There seems to be a lot of interest in this. It goes, in our organization, we check in daily with our line manager and we have a buddy system on our employees. Our conversations with our line managers and with our buddies are not just by email, but sometimes also by video call. Not just about work, but also about personal issues and well-being. So this is, again, this participant, Brenda, is talking about limitations and boundaries and how it is very, very important, again, to emphasize how we should set that and be allowed to do so. I think that's very important too. Don't you agree? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that sounds very good.
Yeah. Okay. There is another question from Evelyn. It's directed more to Dr. Eugene. We have a few bodies or organizations who help with mental health in Malaysia. Example, Befrienders. How effective is this agency if we were to propose this option to our employee? I think it's a very challenging. It puts you in a spot, Dr. Eugene.
Okay. Sorry, can you hear me? But the mute sign's on. I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Yes.
All right. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. First, we have to understand that these are supportive organizations, supportive helplines. Befrienders is not the only one. There are many, many ones, especially if you're from the central region, KL, Selangor. There's a lot. I feel that they are legit helplines that you can actually promote to show to your employees that they can actually call them up. But different helplines will have different functions. You know, some hospitals, they offer psychological, MMHA offers emotional support, Befrienders is about counseling. They all have their different approach, and not necessarily each and every one of them will be suitable for everyone. It's just a way, and think of it like, okay, if you look at the media, if you when they talk about someone who has self-harm, someone who has suicide, they will put at the very bottom line, if you have this similar thoughts or actions, please call this line to help. And I think that works because it's a way of actually letting people to get out, to find some help when they need it, instead of being left hanging there with their own thoughts, with their own difficult behaviors. And I would actually promote it. Is it specifically for Befriender? No. There are many, many other helplines, but of course you can't list down all of them. Just pick a few that you feel comfortable. Check their credentials. If they are good enough, it's something that's well established. Use it. Put it in the email to your employees. Okay, if you're experiencing difficult thoughts, difficult emotions, that you feel overwhelmed and you need someone to talk to, you can call this line, this line, this line. I think that's a very good thing to encourage about. Are they effective? Remember that they are supportive. They are there to be effective to a certain extent, and if they are well trained and they find that the scenario is actually too difficult, then most of them, or in fact all of them, will actually refer for more professional help, and then your employees will actually proceed to get professional help from psychiatrists, psychologists, etc.
Yes, I think the note here is probably to also understand that these helplines are in the interim before help from the mental health professionals can be reached at a point in time. Okay, I think we have time for one more. Yes, sorry, Marie. Yes, please go ahead.
I just think it's important that people accept, acknowledge, and don't feel bad about the fact that you may initially be in contact with somebody that you don't really feel very comfortable with, and it's okay to look for somebody else. It's very important to have a good rapport with anybody that is supporting you. And it doesn't say anything bad about you if the first person that you contact doesn't actually fit very well. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Marie. Tony, do you have anything to add to this?
Nothing immediately springs to mind. I think we seem to have covered most of it.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Thank you all. We will have time for one more question for the panel discussion. When people are having a stressful time, they sometimes fall back on harmful coping strategies, which may include self-harming behaviors like cutting, alcohol, drugs, or suicidal preoccupations. How should we deal with this in the workplace and also on the home front? Tony, would you like to start with this?
I suppose I'll probably focus more on young people in my answer, and let Dr. Eugene and other people maybe talk a little more about adults. There's a big overlap, but I was thinking, in my working experience, much of my work involved young people who resorted to either substance misuse or self-harm, also people with eating disorders who would respond negatively to stress, and it might increase their problematic behaviors. I think one of the things is, if people have a pre-existing difficulty of this type, when they're under stress, they're probably not going to stop it. So trying to get them to just stop is unlikely to work. Making them feel better about themselves, more relaxed, more confident, helping them to understand that this is it's a bit of an ongoing crisis, but it will come to an end. You know, this is actually going to be okay. Reading the media doesn't necessarily give you that impression, but it actually will be okay, you know, further down the line. And helping people to manage things like their self-harm by trying to limit it. If they self-harm, say by cutting and looking at using safer alternatives, things like freezing fruit juice drinks and holding coloured ice cubes against you so that you feel the intense cold and the juice actually runs out and looks a bit like blood. Some people find that a possible alternative to actually cutting themselves so much. And yeah, there's some other techniques like that that people can use. And also keeping it safe and keeping it clean, so that and using things like, just if you haven't cut yourself for 5 minutes, you don't need to do it for the next 5 or 10 minutes, and just taking it, a step at a time. Same with any other, self-destructive behavior. If you can do it for short periods of time and then another short period of time, you can often achieve, more of a break from it than just trying to stop.
Thank you, Tony. Marie, what about you? Anything else to add?
Yeah, like anything else in human behavior, there's a spectrum, and I'm just thinking of people perhaps at the less extreme end of negative coping strategies. I mean, it's all about trying to help yourself not feel bad, or actually to feel better. I would include eating, for instance. Overeating is something that I think is probably happening quite a lot just now with quite a few people. And to find other things that do give you relief, do make you feel better, that are perhaps more positive. And it's the usual stuff like, doing some exercise, moving about, dancing in your apartment, just whatever helps you to feel a bit better and a bit more connected and a bit more okay is really important. So.
Thank you, Marie. Eugene, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Tony and Marie pretty much covered what an individual can do when they experience those. I'm just going to cover a bit more about what happens when employers find out that their employees are using this kind of behavior. Keep in mind that even in psychiatry, if you do have this kind of disorder, substance use disorder, self-harming behavior, we usually don't try to make them stop completely. Instead, we try to reduce the harm that they we call it harm reduction, to minimize the consequences of it. But from an employer perspective, if you do find your employee actually having this, don't focus on the negative behavior. Instead, focus on why they are doing that. Are they actually experiencing certain stress or certain events that's triggering a lot of stress? That's why they are using that coping mechanism. More often than not, if you identify and address that kind of stress-inducing triggers, it would help reduce some of those problematic behaviors or unwanted behaviors. But despite saying that, if the behavior itself is actually very harmful, there's a risk of actually seriously hurting themselves, the best way actually is to refer them, get them to seek professional help. Don't delay it, because they will probably need more professional attention.
Thank you, Eugene. I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thank you very much to all the panelists who have shared very, very practical suggestions on how we can approach certain, or shall I say, our new normal. Okay, back to you, Phoebe.
That's all the time we have for today's webinar. Thank you to the speakers for a very insightful discussion and for sharing your valuable expertise. And we will share a slide that has their contact details, so you can get in touch with them after this if you'd like. Thank you everyone who sent in your questions and for joining us today. And also, thank you to my colleagues, Ira and Aaron, who have worked behind the scenes to put this together. We hope to see everyone for our next webinar in collaboration with Standard Chartered on the 12th of May on Global Market Outlook and FX Strategy. For more information and registration, please visit our BMCC website or contact one of our team members. Take care, stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.